She was mocked and humiliated every day, but one quiet act by a stranger would change her life forever. The morning sun slowly rose over the quiet town, painting the streets in soft gold. Emily walked fast along the cracked sidewalk, holding her old jacket close to her chest. The air was cold, and her shoes made a small sound against the wet ground. She didn't have an umbrella, but she didn't mind the drizzle that touched her face. She was used to to everything, actually. Life hadn't given her much, but she had learned to live with what she had. The diner sat on the corner of the street, its red sign flickering weakly as if it was tired too. Emily worked there every day from early morning until late evening. She tied her brown hair neatly and wore her faded uniform. The fabric had lost its color, and one of the buttons had been sewn back many times, but she made sure it was always clean. When she pushed the door open, the warm smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air. She smiled softly. It was the same smell she had known for 3 years. Her coworkers were already there. Linda, the young waitress with perfect makeup, looked up and smirked. "Morning, poor Emily," she said loudly, laughing with another waiter. "Mike, they always did this," making fun of her for wearing old clothes or not having a car. Emily didn't reply. She just put on her apron and began wiping the tables, pretending she hadn't heard anything. She needed the job. Her mother was sick at home, and every dollar Emily earned went to buy medicine and pay for rent. Some nights, she didn't even eat dinner so her mother could have enough food. She never told anyone that. People already judged her enough. Customers started coming in the same faces as always. The truck drivers who talked too loud, the old man who always complained about his toast being too hard, and the young couple who left big messes on the table. Emily greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, ma'am." Her voice was soft, calm, and kind, even when they ignored her. Sometimes, she would look out the window during a quiet moment. She saw people walking by in nice clothes, holding phones and laughing. For a second, she would imagine what it might feel like to live like them, to not worry about bills or illness or broken shoes. But then she would shake her head and return to her work. Dreaming didn't pay for medicine. Her manager, Mr. Ross, was a strict man who liked things done fast. He never smiled at her, but she didn't expect him to. "Table 6 needs cleaning." "Move faster, Emily," he would shout. She always nodded and obeyed. She worked quietly, never arguing, never asking for breaks. She had learned that if she just kept her head down and worked hard, maybe life would get a little better one day. Around noon, the diner got busy. The noise grew louder, plates clinking, people talking, orders being shouted. Emily moved from table to table, her tray balanced carefully in one hand. She served coffee, carried plates, wiped spills, and always said thank you even when people didn't. Her back hurt. Her feet ached, but she didn't stop. At one table, a group of young office workers laughed as she approached. One of them whispered something, and the others chuckled. She didn't know what they said, but she knew it was about her. She felt her face burn, but she forced a smile and placed their plates down gently. "Enjoy your meal," she said softly. As she walked away, their laughter followed her. In the small break room, she finally sat down for a minute. Her lunch was a sandwich she had made at home, just bread and butter. She pulled out her phone to check messages, but there was only one. It was from her mother. "Hope you're having a good day, dear. Don't forget to eat." Emily smiled faintly and replied, "I'm fine, Mom. I love you." She didn't tell her mother how tired she really was. Her mother already worried too much. When the break ended, she went back out and saw a new customer sitting by the window. A man in a suit had just come in. He looked out of place among the usual crowd. She didn't know yet how much that man would change her life. For now, he was just another stranger, quietly sipping his coffee while reading something on his phone. The afternoon dragged on. The laughter from coworkers, the rude comments, and the long hours blended into a blur. Emily kept moving like a small gear in a big noisy machine. Every time someone laughed at her clothes, she pretended not to hear. Every time someone rolled their eyes at her slow steps, she just apologized softly and hurried more. She had learned that kindness was her only shield. When the shift finally ended, she was the last one to leave. The others left laughing, talking about weekend plans and expensive clothes. Emily stayed behind to clean the counter. Mr. Ross barely looked at her when he said, "Don't forget to mop before you go." She nodded and did it without complaint. Outside, the rain had started again. She wrapped her thin jacket tightly and began walking home. The streetlights flickered and puddles formed under her shoes. She didn't have an umbrella, but she smiled when she saw a small cat hiding under a bench. She tore off a piece of her sandwich and placed it there. "Stay warm, little one," she whispered. By the time she reached home, her clothes were damp and her hair clung to her face. Her mother greeted her with a weak smile from the bed. "You must be tired," her mother said softly. Emily shook her head. "I'm fine, Mom. I brought your medicine." She sat beside her and helped her drink water. They talked a little, mostly about small things. Emily didn't tell her about the teasing or the spilled coffee earlier that day, or how her heart felt heavy with loneliness. She just held her mother's hand and smiled. Later that night, her mother fell asleep. Emily sat by the small window watching the rain fall. The lights of the town looked blurry through the glass. She thought about her day, about the laughter, the rude comments, and the long hours. But she also thought about the small moments that made it worth it. The old man who said thank you, the smile of a little girl who liked her milkshake, and the fact that her mother had her medicine tonight. She sighed deeply and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." She didn't know that tomorrow would be the day everything changed at the same diner. The same uniform and the same laughter would soon turn into silence. She had no idea that the stranger she had served quietly would soon walk in again and change her life forever. And as she closed her tired eyes, the rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, as if preparing the world for what was coming next. The next day started just like every other day for Emily. She woke up early, made tea for her mother, and left home before the sun was fully out. The streets were quiet, and a soft wind carried the smell of wet earth from last night's rain. She walked fast, clutching her worn jacket around her shoulders. Her shoes were still damp, and her fingers felt cold, but she kept going. She couldn't be late. She had already been warned too many times. When she reached the diner, it was already busy. The sound of frying bacon and the smell of coffee filled the air. Her manager, Mr. Ross, was standing near the counter with his arms crossed. "You're late by 2 minutes," he said sharply without even looking at her. Emily quickly apologized and hurried to the back to tie her apron. She started her shift immediately, trying to catch up on the morning rush. It was a Saturday, which meant the diner would be full all day. People came in and out, talking loudly, leaving half-eaten plates behind, snapping fingers for service. Emily moved as fast as she could. Her arms ached, but she didn't stop. She knew that if she worked hard and kept quiet, the day would pass just like the others. But she didn't know this day would be different, painful, humiliating, and unforgettable. Around noon, a group of men walked in wearing suits and expensive watches. They were loud and confident, the kind of customers who liked attention. One of them looked around and laughed. "This place hasn't changed a bit," he said. Emily greeted them politely and led them to a table. They ordered several cups of coffee, burgers, and fries. She wrote everything down carefully, making sure not to make a mistake. While waiting for their order, she hurried to serve another table. A mother with 2 kids asked for pancakes, and Emily smiled as she took the order, but her hands were shaking slightly from tiredness. The morning rush had been rough. She hadn't even taken a break yet. The kitchen bell rang. Her order for the group of men was ready. She balanced the tray on her arm and walked carefully through the narrow space between tables. The coffee cups were filled to the top, steam rising from each one. As she reached their table, one of the men turned suddenly in his chair. Bumping into her arm, the tray tilted before she could steady it. Hot coffee spilled over the edge, splashing across the man's expensive jacket. He jumped up instantly, shouting, "Are you kidding me?" The sound echoed through the diner. Everyone turned to look. Emily froze, her heart pounding. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, reaching for napkins. "It was an accident," the man slapped her hand away. "You ruined my jacket. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" His voice was loud, full of anger. The other men laughed nervously, trying to calm him down, but he kept shouting. This is what happens when you hire people who can't even hold a tray. The laughter from nearby tables began. Some customers whispered to each other. Linda, the other waitress, stood behind the counter, smirking, clearly enjoying the scene. Emily felt her throat tighten, her cheeks burning red. Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself not to cry. She kept apologizing softly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, sir. Please let me clean it." Mr. Ross came rushing over, his face tight with anger. "What happened here?" he barked. The man pointed at Emily. "Your waitress just spilled coffee all over me. This is unbelievable." Emily opened her mouth to explain, but the manager didn't let her speak. "I'm so sorry, sir," he said quickly, bowing slightly. "We'll take care of it." "Emily, you should have been more careful. How many times have I told you to watch where you're going?" Everyone in the diner was staring. Emily stood still, her hands shaking. "It was an accident," she whispered, but Mr. Ross snapped, "Enough. Go clean up this mess." The man waved his hands angrily. "Forget it. Just bring me another coffee and this time. Make sure it's hot and in the cup, not on me." His friends laughed again, and Emily felt something break inside her. She turned away, blinking fast to stop the tears from falling. In the kitchen, she stood quietly, holding onto the counter. Her heart felt heavy and her chest hurt. She could still hear their laughter through the door. She took a deep breath and wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She couldn't afford to cry. She needed this job. Her mother's medicine depended on it. So she made another coffee, steadying her trembling hands, and carried it back out with care as she placed the new cup on the table. One of the men smirked and said, "Careful this time." "Sweetheart," the others chuckled. Emily didn't look up. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, and walked away. Near the counter, Linda whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Maybe she should work in a laundry instead. At least there, spilling water won't be a problem." A few people laughed again. Emily's face turned pale. She wanted to disappear, to run outside and breathe. But she couldn't leave. She went to the back of the diner, near the cleaning supplies, and stood there for a moment, trying to hold herself together. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall, her tired eyes. Her messy hair, her uniform stained from the coffee. She barely recognized herself. She thought about quitting. For a second, she imagined walking out the door, never coming back. But then she saw her mother's face and her mind sick, smiling weakly, waiting for her daughter to come home. That thought kept her standing. She took another deep breath, washed her hands, and went back to work. Hours passed, and the scene faded into whispers, but the humiliation stayed with her. Even when she smiled at new customers, her heart was heavy. She felt everyone's eyes on her, judging her, laughing silently. Every time she passed the men's table, her stomach twisted. By evening, the crowd had thinned. The group of men left, still joking about the clumsy waitress. Emily cleaned their table quietly, picking up the used napkins and wiping away the spilled coffee. Her hands moved slowly, almost numb. Mr. Ross approached her one last time before closing. "Try not to make any more mistakes," he said coldly. "We can't afford another scene like that." She nodded silently. He didn't notice how red her eyes were, or how hard she was trying not to cry. When the diner finally closed, Emily stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet now, and only a few cars passed by. She sat down on the curb for a moment, holding her bag in her lap. The day's events replayed in her head again, and again the laughter. The shouting, the spilled coffee, the embarrassment. Tears rolled down her cheeks at last. She wiped them quickly, looking around to make sure no one saw. Then she stood up and began walking home, each step heavy. Her shoes making soft sounds on the wet ground. She didn't know that someone had been watching the whole thing from a corner table. The man in the gray suit who had come in quietly while everyone was laughing. He had seen it all. The spilled coffee, the cruel laughter, and the way Emily still kept her kindness even when everyone else turned against her. He had said nothing that day, but his eyes had followed her every move. Emily didn't notice him. She just kept walking home, unaware that her worst day at work had also brought someone into her life who would soon change everything. The diner was quieter than usual the next morning. But Emily's nerves were still on edge. She woke up before the sun, as she always did, body stiff from yesterday's long hours and the embarrassment she had endured. Her mother was still sleeping, and Emily took a moment to watch her gentle breathing. She made herself a small breakfast, toast and tea, careful not to make a sound. Every movement was quiet, almost as if she feared disturbing the calm before heading back into the chaos of the diner. The streets were damp from an early mist, and Emily walked fast, clutching her jacket tightly. Her shoes squelched in the wet pavement, but she didn't slow down. She had already promised herself she would not let yesterday's humiliation define her. She held her head high, even though the knots of worry and exhaustion twisted in her stomach. When she arrived at the diner, the morning crowd had already begun. The regular customers trickled in, old men with newspapers, young couples with shopping bags, a few workers stopping in for coffee before heading to their jobs. Emily took a deep breath, smoothing her apron, and greeted them all with a quiet, "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, ma'am." Her voice was soft but steady, a careful shield against the judgments and whispers of the previous day. Emily moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her hands balancing plates and cups as if they were second nature. She had mastered the art of keeping her composure even while her heart pounded. Each smile, each polite greeting, was like armor, shielding her from the mockery and harsh words that seemed to follow her like shadows. Mid-morning, a tall man in a sharp gray suit walked into the diner. Emily noticed him immediately, not because he said anything, but because he carried himself differently. He wasn't loud, he didn't boast, and he didn't demand attention. Yet there was something about the way he moved and observed the diner that made the room feel different. He walked calmly to a table by the window and took a seat, placing a leather briefcase gently beside him. He didn't glance at Emily, but his eyes subtly followed her as she served other customers. Emily felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. She had never seen him before, and yet something about his presence felt important. He wasn't like the other people in the diner, who laughed at her mistakes and whispered behind her back. He seemed patient, calm, and for some reason, kind. She shook her head slightly, trying to refocus on her work. The morning rush came with no warning. Orders flew in, plates clattered, and the kitchen bell rang repeatedly. Emily moved like a whirlwind, carrying trays, refilling coffee cups, and wiping up crumbs before they could annoy anyone. She noticed a few customers whispering and glancing at her, but she ignored it. She had learned to keep her eyes on the task at hand, as she approached a table with a tray full of sandwiches and coffee. The man in the gray suit raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me," he said quietly. His voice was calm, polite, and confident. Emily stopped immediately, feeling her heart beat faster. "Yes, sir," she asked softly, approaching the table with caution. "I would like a simple cup of black coffee, please," he said. He smiled faintly, not at her, but in a way that seemed to invite respect rather than fear. Emily nodded and hurried to the counter to prepare it. Even her hands, shaking slightly from nerves and exhaustion, moved with care. She wanted to make sure this one cup was perfect. When she returned with the coffee, he looked up and said softly, "Thank you. I appreciate your effort." His words were so unexpected, so gentle, that Emily's chest tightened. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Not a customer, not a manager, not even her coworkers. The small kindness in his voice gave her a strange warmth, a feeling she had almost forgotten. He didn't order anything else, just the coffee, and Emily noticed that he watched her closely as she moved around the diner. Not in a judgmental way, but with a curiosity that made her feel seen. He observed everything: the careful way she cleaned the tables, the way she balanced plates, the faint tremor in her hands, the polite smiles she offered even to rude customers. Emily wondered who he was. He didn't wear a name tag, and he didn't ask for anything extravagant. He just sat quietly, sipping his coffee, occasionally glancing at the other customers who had laughed at her the day before. Something in the way he watched her made her realize that he understood. Somehow, without a word, he understood what she had endured. Hours passed. The diner grew busier, and the man in the suit remained calm, observing everything without drawing attention. Emily served him carefully each time he requested something, though it was mostly just refills of his coffee. She noticed that he never laughed at the rude customers, never made a fuss, but his eyes followed the way they treated her. At one point, a group of rowdy teenagers entered and started teasing her again, mocking her uniform and her shoes. Emily felt the familiar sting in her chest, the weight of embarrassment pressing down. She almost faltered, almost let the words and laughter shake her confidence. But then she caught the man's gaze across the room. He didn't look angry. He didn't scold her. He simply looked at her, and in that look, she felt a quiet strength. Like someone was silently telling her, "You are worth more than their laughter." She steadied her hands, took a deep breath, and continued serving the teenagers. Her movements were precise, her smile intact, though her chest still ached. Every word of mockery that came at her seemed to lose its power when she thought of the man watching quietly. For the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of courage. During a brief lull, she returned to the counter to catch her breath. The man in the suit finally spoke again. This time, in a soft voice that carried just enough for her to hear. "You're handling this very well." Most people would have given up already. Emily froze for a moment, her face heating up. She whispered a quiet "thank you," though she wasn't sure he could hear. But she felt it the acknowledgement. The understanding that she had been seen and respected for something beyond her uniform and her mistakes. The day continued in this rhythm. Emily moved tirelessly from table to table, the man in the suit quietly observing, never interfering, never praising aloud, but his presence alone changed the air in the diner. It was as if, by just being there, he silently told everyone that the way they judged her was wrong. As the afternoon approached, the diner grew quieter again. Emily felt exhausted, but a strange sense of hope had taken root inside her. The man hadn't asked for anything complicated, hadn't demanded attention, and yet his quiet respect and calm observation had made her feel more seen than anyone had in years. She realized that there were people in the world who could see beyond appearances, beyond mistakes, beyond the judgment of others. When the lunch rush ended, Emily had a few minutes to herself. She cleaned the tables near the man's seat, her movements careful and precise. She noticed that he hadn't left yet. Instead, he was watching her, a faint smile on his face, as if he understood the weight she carried every single day. Emily didn't know who he was or why he had come. But in that moment, she felt a small sense of validation. Someone important had noticed her effort, her kindness, and her patience. It wasn't a promotion, it wasn't money, and it wasn't fame, but it was something far more valuable: acknowledgement. Someone had seen her struggle, and someone had respected her for it. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The mocking laughter of yesterday seemed distant, almost meaningless. She finished her work with renewed energy, her movements still careful, but her heart lighter. She didn't yet know what would happen next, but she had a small, precious hope that perhaps, just perhaps, things were about to change. And as she wiped down the last table near the window, she glanced at the man once more. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and Emily felt her chest swell with something she hadn't felt in a long time: courage. She realized that no matter what happened after this day, she had survived yesterday's humiliation and today's challenges. She had carried herself with dignity, and someone had noticed. That alone made all the struggles worth it. Little did Emily know, a quiet, observant man in the gray suit would soon step forward in a way that would silence everyone in the diner and change her life forever. Until then, she continued her work, unaware of the storm of change that was approaching, and aware that the day's events would soon become the turning point in her story. The diner was unusually quiet that afternoon. Most of the regular customers had left, leaving only a few people scattered at tables, quietly sipping coffee or reading newspapers. Emily moved carefully between tables, her steps light but steady, trying not to make any mistakes. Her hands still shook slightly from the morning rush, and her back ached from hours of serving food and carrying heavy trays. She had cleaned, wiped, and polished every surface at least twice, and yet deep inside, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety that never seemed to leave her. The man in the gray suit remained in his seat by the window. Emily had noticed that he rarely looked at other people. His eyes were always on her. There was a calmness about him, but at the same time, it was an intensity that made her feel both nervous and strangely safe. She didn't know who he was, but she sensed he had authority. A presence that demanded respect without demanding it loudly down. Suddenly, the door to the diner opened with a soft chime. Emily looked up, expecting a new customer, but it was Mr. Ross, her manager. He appeared slightly nervous, which was unusual for him. "Emily," he called softly, walking toward her. "The gentleman at the window. He wants to speak with you and me together." Now, her stomach dropped. She hadn't done anything wrong, but her mind raced. Was it another complaint? Another lecture? Her hands shook as she followed Mr. Ross to the man's table. The gray-suited man stood as they approached, his expression calm, almost serene, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence that made Emily's heart race. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to the chairs across from him. Emily obeyed, and Mr. Ross stood stiffly beside her, looking slightly uncomfortable. The man in the suit cleared his throat and spoke, his voice deep and steady, carrying across the quiet diner. "I have been watching the way this young woman has worked today," he said, nodding toward Emily, "and I have been here long enough to see how she has been treated by her colleagues and customers." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She felt herself trembling slightly. Her face burned as she tried to keep her composure. I'm sorry," she whispered, unsure what to say. The man smiled faintly. But it wasn't a smile meant to reassure her. It was a smile of understanding and quiet authority. "There is nothing to apologize for," he said. "You have shown patience, kindness, and dignity, even when others laughed at you or treated you unfairly. That is rare in this world." Emily blinked, shocked. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this. Not a customer, not her manager, not even her family. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her throat felt tight, her heart pounded in a strange mix of fear and hope. Then the man turned his gaze to Mr. Ross, who looked suddenly very small and uncomfortable. "I came here today to see my staff in action," he said firmly. "I wanted to know how they treated their customers and each other, and what I have seen is disturbing, but also inspiring." He paused, letting the words sink in. The few customers remaining in the diner had stopped what they were doing. Sensing that something important was happening, "Emily," he continued, his eyes softening as they met hers, "you have endured mockery, scolding, and humiliation. Yet you have continued to serve with kindness. You have treated every person with respect, even those who did not deserve it. That shows character, strength, and grace. You are someone who deserves more than this." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together in her lap. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Someone had actually noticed her efforts, her struggles, and her patience. Someone important had seen the value in her. Even when everyone else had laughed at her and belittled her, the man reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it gently on the table. Emily looked down and froze. The logo on the card was instantly recognizable. It was the mark of a huge multinational company, one of the largest chains of diners in the country. The name printed boldly on the card was James Harlan. Emily's eyes widened. She had heard stories of Mr. Harlan, the billionaire owner who rarely appeared in public. She couldn't believe he was standing here, looking at her personally. "I am James Harlan," he said calmly, watching her reaction. "And I want you to know that your dedication and integrity have not gone unnoticed. Not by me, and not by the company." Mr. Ross swallowed hard. He had seen Mr. Harlan before in corporate meetings and knew the power behind the name. The sudden realization that the billionaire himself was addressing him made him stumble over his words. I didn't," he stammered, but Harlan raised a hand, stopping him. "Silence," Harlan said firmly, his voice carrying authority that made everyone in the diner lean forward, even those who had been quietly finishing their meals. "You will listen now. I have been observing my staff across this city for years. Some treat others with respect. Some treat them with contempt. What I saw today was a mixture. But one person stood out, not for mistakes or weakness, but for their strength of character. Emily has shown dignity in the face of mockery, patience in the face of frustration, and kindness when it was least expected. That is a quality I value above all else. The diner went completely silent. Emily's co-workers, who had mocked Hertha, ones who whispered behind her, back and laughed at her mistakes, looked at her with wide eyes. Their mouths opened, but no words came out. Even Mr. Ross, who had scolded her relentlessly, looked ashamed, his face pale. Harlan's voice rang out again, commanding attention. I came here quietly to observe. I have now made my decision. Emily will no longer be just a waitress. I am offering her a position in the company's regional office, where she can grow, learn, and be treated with the respect she deserves. This decision is final. Emily felt her knees weaken slightly. She looked at Mr. Harlan, then at the card still lying on the table. Her hands shook as she picked it up, feeling the weight of the moment. She couldn't find words. Her heart was pounding so hard that she could barely breathe. She had never imagined that this day, which had started with humiliation and mockery, could end with recognition and an opportunity that would change her life. The customers in the diner watched quietly, stunned. Some whispered to each other, realizing that the young waitress they had ignored or laughed at was now being publicly praised by a billionaire. Emily's coworkers looked at her in disbelief. Linda, who had often mocked her, couldn't meet her eyes. Mike, who had whispered jokes behind her back, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The power dynamics had shifted completely in a matter of minutes. Emily's voice finally came, soft but full of emotion. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you. Thank you for noticing me. Harlan nodded kindly. You don't need to say anything. Just continue to be the person you are. Let the world see your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small again. Even Mr. Ross, humbled by the presence of the billionaire and the magnitude of Emily's recognition, could only nod silently. He realized that he had judged her unfairly, and that his harsh words now seemed insignificant in the face of true character. Emily left the diner that day feeling a mix of disbelief, joy, and hope. She walked home slowly, carrying the business card in her hand like a treasure. For the first time in her life, she felt that her struggles, her patience, and her kindness had been recognized by someone who truly mattered. She thought about her mother, about the long days and nights of work, about the laughter and the humiliation she had endured. And now, all of it had led to this moment, a moment that would change everything. The diner itself felt different after that day. The whispers, the mockery, and the laughter had vanished, replaced by quiet awe and respect. Emily's coworkers had learned a lesson they would never forget, that true worth isn't measured by clothes, status, or appearances, but by character, patience, and how one treats others even when no one is watching. And as Emily stepped out into the evening air, feeling the cool breeze against her face, she knew that life had shifted. The day had started with humiliation and mockery, but it ended with hope, recognition, and the promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. All it took was one person noticing the truth, and that one person had changed everything. The next morning, Emily woke up with a strange mix of excitement and disbelief. Yesterday's event still felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. She sat by the small window in her room, holding the business card from Mr. James Harlan, the billionaire who had changed her life in one afternoon. Her fingers traced the edges of the card again and again, as if touching it could somehow make the dream more real. The world outside was quiet, the streets bathed in soft golden light. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt that life might actually be turning in her favor. Her mother stirred in the bed behind her, coughing softly. "Emily, breakfast is ready," she said, her voice weak but full of warmth. Emily hurried to prepare a small breakfast, her hands moving with more energy than usual. She placed a cup of tea and a simple toast in front of her mother. Her mother looked up, smiling softly. "You seem happy today," she said. Emily nodded, holding back tears. "Yes, Mom. Something good happened yesterday. I can't explain it yet, but it's a start of something new." By the time Emily reached the diner, it was quiet and almost empty. She stepped in, her apron feeling strange against her uniform. Everything seemed the same, the smell of coffee, the clatter of plates, but she knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. Mr. Ross met her at the counter, his face tight and nervous. "Emily, Mr. Harlan wants to see you again. He said he'll explain everything," said hurriedly. Emily's heart pounded as she walked to the table by the window. Mr. Harlan was already there, sitting calmly, his briefcase beside him. His expression was gentle, but serious. "Emily," he said as she approached, "I want to formally offer you a position with my company in our regional office. It's an assistant position, which will allow you to learn, grow, and eventually move into management if you wish. This is not a temporary arrangement. I want you to have opportunities that reflect your character and your work ethic, not just your current circumstances." Emily's eyes widened. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She had never imagined a day like this, not in her wildest dreams. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the lines of her vision. She took a deep breath and whispered, I don't know what to say." "Thank you. Thank you so much," Mr. Harlan smiled. "You don't need to say anything. Just continue to be yourself. That is enough. Your life is about to change, and I want to make sure it changes for the better." The few customers who had remained in the diner that morning looked on in awe. Emily's coworkers, who had often laughed at her, now seemed small and uncertain. Linda, who had made fun of her uniform and shoes countless times, stared at Emily with wide eyes. She had nothing to say. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Mike, too, shifted awkwardly. Realizing that the person he had once considered inferior was now being recognized by one of the most powerful men in the city, Emily was given instructions by Mr. Harlan about the next steps. She would begin training in the regional office the following week. The company would cover her travel expenses and provide housing assistance temporarily. Everything she had ever struggled to achieve suddenly seemed within reach. She was stunned, her heart swelling with hope, gratitude, disbelief, all at once. That evening, Emily returned home, clutching the business card and the document she had received. Her mother was sitting on the bed, looking at her expectantly. Emily ran to her, tears spilling freely. "Mom, it's real. It's really real. I'm going to have a job in the company, a real chance to build a future for us." Her mother's eyes welled up with tears. "Oh, Emily, I always knew you were special, but I never imagined someone would see it like this," she whispered. They embraced, holding on to each other tightly. For a long time, neither spoke. Words weren't needed. The warmth of hope and the comfort of family filled the room. Over the next few days, Emily prepared for her new role. She cleaned her small apartment thoroughly, packed a few essential items, and said goodbye to the diner where she had spent so many long, difficult hours. She walked through the familiar streets one last time, taking mental snapshots of the corners, the old lampposts, the bakery she had passed every morning. Even though she was leaving, she felt a sense of gratitude for the place that had taught her resilience and patience. Her first day at the regional office was both intimidating and exciting. The building was tall, shiny, and full of people bustling about, each with their own purpose and tasks. Emily felt nervous, but she reminded herself of Mr. Harlan's words, that her character and dedication were more important than appearances or past mistakes. She was determined to give her best. Her supervisor welcomed her warmly, noting Mr. Harlan's high recommendation. Emily was trained in office procedures, communications, and organizational tasks. At first, everything felt overwhelming: the schedules, the reports, the constant phone calls, but Emily approached every task with the same patience and focus she had shown at the diner. She made notes, asked questions politely, and learned quickly. Her coworkers began to notice her dedication. Unlike before, nobody laughed at her. Instead, they respected her calm approach and the care she put into her work. Weeks passed, and Emily began to thrive in her new role. She handled tasks with confidence, developed relationships with colleagues, and slowly began to understand the larger operations of the company. The small, quiet courage that had carried her through years of hardship now gave her a sense of pride and purpose. Every time she completed a task well, she thought of her mother, the diner, and the journey that had brought her here. Back home, her mother's health improved thanks to the steady income and medical support. Emily was able to afford better food, medicine, and small comforts that had been impossible before. The worries that had clouded her life began to lift, replaced by hope, stability, and the knowledge that someone had believed in her potential. One afternoon, Emily received an unexpected email from Mr. Harlan himself. It was brief but heartfelt. Keep being yourself. The world is full of people who underestimate others, but you have proven that patience, kindness, and diligence matter more than appearances. I am proud of your progress. Emily smiled and felt tears of joy prick at her eyes. It was validation beyond any promotion or money. It was recognition of who she truly was. Months later, the diner where Emily had worked received a visit from Mr. Harlan once again. This time, he came not to observe, but to deliver a message. He thanked the staff for their work, but he specifically mentioned Emily as an example of integrity, kindness, and dedication. Everyone in the diner listened in silence, realizing how wrong they had been. The people who had once mocked her now understood that true value is not shown in appearance, loud voices, or jokes at someone's expense. It is shown through character and how one treats others. Even when no one is watching, Emily's life had changed, but she never forgot the struggles that had brought her there. She continued to work diligently, always treating people with kindness, patience, and respect. Her story became known in her community as an example of perseverance and the power of being noticed by someone who truly understood one's worth. On quiet evenings, Emily would sit by the window, looking at the streets of her town, reflecting on how far she had come. She remembered the long walks to the diner, the spilled coffee, the laughter, and the scolding. She remembered the moments she had wanted to give up but didn't. She knew that those moments had shaped her, had made her stronger, and had prepared her for the opportunities that had come unexpectedly. She thought about Mr. Harlan, about the quiet, powerful presence he had shown, and how his recognition had shifted everything. She realized that sometimes all it takes is one person who sees your true worth to change the course of your life. The lessons she had learned, the importance of patience, kindness, humility, and perseverance would stay with her forever. Her mother often said, "You never let the world harden you, Emily. You remained kind even when it was hard. That is your strength." Emily smiled, knowing it was true. And as she prepared for each new day in her job, she carried that strength with her. Ready to face challenges with the same courage, she had always shown. Emily had gone from being mocked and humiliated to being recognized and respected. The laughter that had once seemed unbearable was now a distant memory, replaced by hope, opportunity, and the knowledge that her life was no longer defined by her circumstances, but by her journey had taught her a truth she would never forget. The world can be cruel, but courage, kindness, and patience are always noticed in the end. And sometimes, when you least expect it, someone comes along who changes everything, silences the laughter, lifts your spirit, and opens doors you never thought possible. From that day forward, Emily lived not only for herself, but also to inspire others. She became proof that no matter how small or overlooked you may feel, your true value can never be hidden forever. And the right person will see it when the time is right. Life had finally turned in her favor, and she walked forward with gratitude, hope, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of hard work and kindness.